As we have worked, we've really been focused on finding ways to make the way we design, implement, and report student learning increasingly clear. Our goal is and has been to capture and report student learning in a manner that is meaningful, accurate, and actionable for our students, our families, as well as our educators. To open, we want to kind of sit in a situation. Each of you has had an experience of receiving your child's report card, whether it's come to you via email, regular mail, or out of your child's backpack, as is the image here. Despite our busy schedules, each of you set aside the time to dig in and really see how your child and children are doing. In middle school, your child, traditionally in District 65, has received a letter grade in each of our core courses that is ranged from an A to an F. But what does that letter grade really mean? Does this mean that they know the content, well, but did not do their assignments well or on time? Does this mean that they know some of the content, but not all of the content? Does it mean that they are or are not participating in class? What does your child need to do to advance their learning? Does this mean your child has learned what they're supposed to learn? Does it mean that they still have something important to learn they may not yet understand? Does it mean that they're on track for high school, for college? We all sit with this question like, is this good enough? Should I be worried about this? What does it mean? There is a different way to report student learning than the way we have traditionally been reporting learning in our middle schools with our report card. Rather than traditional reporting and grading, which has been in use for well over 100 years, and was initially designed to sort students into different academic tracks and ultimately different educational and career tracks, we can shift to a system that's designed to hold grade level expectations for all students and report learning in a manner that reflects where students are in their learning journey, always with an eye for what a child is doing well and what they have not yet learned. The questions change from how can I make my grade go up to what is it that I still need to learn and how can I learn that? Yeah, just want to check the chat here. Good, all right. All right. So what is this new and different way? Standards-based grading is a method to measure and report how students are doing in meeting the learning goals for their grade level, as determined by our state standards. The proficiency benchmarks in the state of Illinois are measured by our Illinois Assessment of Readiness, which our kids take in 3rd through 8th grade annually in the spring. And those benchmarks aligned to our Illinois standards and our assessment of readiness are some of the most challenging benchmarks in the country for reading and math. Reporting standards, sometimes called learning standards, are the academic skills our children should know and be able to do for this grade level by the end of the school year. Standards-based report cards give you a learning measure or grade for each learning goal, so students receive multiple grades in each subject. This slide really captures this on the left, the idea of the traditional grade B in literacy, and in the right, some specific descriptors that in a standards-based system would show up on a report card. And we can see in this case, the potential performance levels of a student. Our vision for this new way of reporting learning is that report card grades are meaningful, accurate, and actionable for students, their families, and educators. The system that helps to move us towards this vision is standards-aligned learning and standards-aligned report cards. On this report card, which is a snapshot of current learning, we convey two separate concepts. First, we convey learning measures, which reflect where students are in current proficiency on grade level standards, which is our content learning. And second, we report on learning habits, which reflect how students go about their learning. So as we dig in tonight, I'm going to really kind of try to spell out 3 shifts that we'll see in place in our middle school report cards for next year. And we'll go a little bit more deeply into those 3 shifts before we look at some of the kind of more specific details and take questions and answers. The first shift that I will speak to tonight is a move from general to specific. Please take a moment to just read this quote. For many of us, we came up in systems that reflect what Joe Feldman, the author of Grading for Equity, refers to in this quote. Our educational model and mission has changed. Schools are committed to elevating all students to learn at high levels and to meet grade level expectations. Whereas in the past, only a limited few were ultimately afforded that opportunity over time. The commitment of public education has changed, but our way of reporting learning has not necessarily changed. As we talked about briefly above, in a traditional system, your child may receive a B in their literacy class. This B summarizes how the child is doing on their reading, their writing, their speaking, and their listening, on literature and informational texts. Additionally, there's usually some information rolled in there about how well the child has completed their assignments and participated in class. There's a lot of really good information hidden behind that B. The problem is, it's never really clear. As we began to spell out above, the difference in a standards-based system is that students and parents have a clearer understanding of what is expected at each grade level, and they're receiving feedback and grading that let the student and the family know where the student is in relation to grade level expectations. The previous slide shared what we have seen in the traditional report card in a middle school, a B in a class for a trimester. This slide shares what we will see in our future report card. This includes descriptions of what students are expected to know and be able to do at the grade level and where they are currently performing in relation to this grade level descriptor. We can see that the student is progressing on determines theme or central idea and on determining the author's main idea. This means they're growing, but they're not yet meeting the expectation at our grade level. They are meeting the grade level expectation on tracing and evaluating, and they're extending, which means they've met and they're moving beyond in the area of citing textual evidence. Now we're going to move into shift 2. The second shift that we're taking on is this idea of moving from combined to separate. District 65 is committed to providing feedback to families that is increasingly meaningful, accurate, and actionable. This second quote by Joe Feldman is essentially stating that blending content, knowledge, and behavior can lead to subjectivity and bias. Standards-based grading can help to minimize that subjectivity and bias as we get deeper and better at the work. In this particular shift, what we want to call out and highlight is that rather than that one combined B, we are now going to be reporting learning both by academic learning measures, which can be referred to as a product of learning, and an academic learning measure is what students know and do in relation to clear learning standards. That's our math learning, our literacy learning, our arts learning. We also, in each course, will report learning habits. And for those of you that were middle school parents this year, you saw those added to the report card this year. And it was engages in learning, prepares to learn, and takes initiative to learn. Learning habits, which we also sometimes refer to as the process of learning, is how our students go about learning. Students that are strong moving forward are they demonstrate strong learning habits, which help to advance their understanding of grade level learning. When we take a look at learning habits, we specifically are calling out these 3 big areas: preparing to learn, engaging in learning, and takes initiative to learn. Take a quick moment and read the sub-bullets to really get an understanding of what is being looked for and reflected in the particular areas of learning habits or process of learning. Within these categories, you can see we highlight some very important executive function skills, as well as skills connected to student agency, collaboration, and social emotional learning. Between the skills here and the critical thinking and problem-solving skills that are highlighted in some of our content area standards, we are working strongly towards advancing our students' 21st century skills. How you go about your work matters, and we want our students to have clear feedback, as well as our families to have clear feedback on how our students are going about learning. This particular area on the report card, you will receive feedback as either beginning to meet the expectations, progressing, or meeting. In some cases, a child may also receive an IE, which is insufficient evidence, which might mean that the student had an excessive amount of absences and we did not have the opportunity to assess them in that particular skill. Here we have a quick visual to help folks understand kind of how learning habits work. For the sake of this slide, we'll take a descriptor from taking initiative in learning. And the one we'll focus on is advocates for one's learning needs. We know the shift from middle school to middle school from 5th grade is a big shift. A student moves from having one primary educator to working with at least 6 different educators, and they spend less time with those educators. Over the long term, a student needs to be supported in developing their ability to advocate for themselves and their learning needs. Early on, a student may not speak up when they are not clear on what they need to do or how to do the work. They may only do this once in a while. The student and family would receive feedback. In this new reporting system, the student and family would receive feedback that they're beginning to take initiative in this area of learning. As educators work with the class and individual students to take increased responsibility for their learning and teach students how and when to advocate for themselves and what they need, the student will begin to seek out what they need more often, and that report card measure may well shift from beginning to progressing. When that student then shifts even further to doing this with consistency and independence, that report card measure would then ultimately shift to meeting expectations. The skills associated with taking initiative in learning are critically important as our students move through our middle schools and onto EHS, where opportunities like Wild Kid Academy creates an opportunity to access support, and students are expected to monitor and take the necessary steps to support their academic success. Staying in this idea of separating, we're going to now focus on the other half. We've talked about learning habits or the process of learning, and now we're back into academic learning measures or the product. The second area that we're reporting on are these academic learning measures. As we discussed before, we break these down into descriptors to increase clarity and transparency. This image can help connect to the way that we are designing our learning. Educators plan units of instruction that are aligned to our most important learning, which are the descriptors on our report card. This priority learning is built into daily learning targets and weekly learning goals. These learning targets are regularly communicated with our students, and as we get deeper into standards-based learning and standards-based report cards, students become partners in understanding what that learning is and being able to assess themselves as they move through their learning journey. This leads to greater transparency about what needs to be learned and how the student is doing on that learning. All right, I'm going to click this one. All right, so now we get into the nuts and bolts a little bit about what is this going to look like. What's important here is we've pulled a section of the report card. And in this case, we're looking at the report card descriptors for visual arts. And for this particular class, they have 3 descriptors that are academic learning measures that capture the priority learning in that course. They are tied to our core art standards, and the big ideas are creating, producing, and presenting. And you can see them spelled out at the top. The student will get feedback on those 3 academic learning measures as they're working through their arts rotation. And when they receive a score on the report card, they would receive a score anywhere from beginning to progressing, to meeting, to potentially extending those academic learning measures. Keep in mind, we do have that measure for insufficient evidence as well, if we don't have the necessary work from a student or product from a student to be able to issue an accurate grade. And the reason with this image, you notice that we have highlighted just the descriptors in rotation 1. That's because our arts courses are only offered in a particular rotation. So students would be assessed on all 3 descriptors, but just in the first rotation. And then you'll see underneath that they would also be assessed in the way that they approach their learning, the learning habits, and those stay consistent across courses. Our second example on the academic learning measure side or the product side is we've provided the descriptors for math. These descriptors, what's important to notice here with the magnifying glass is that we will not assess all descriptors every trimester. Our trimesters are focused on very specific priority areas of learning, and we will assess the learning that is priority for that trimester. This information will be available to students and to families as we issue the reporting descriptors and learning targets for each trimester. All of this is aligned ultimately to elevate the opportunities for transparency, to know what is expected of us so that we can better understand how we are doing. All right, shift 3. And shift 3 is really focused on the fact that standards-based learning can help elevate clarity and agency in learning. Within a standards-based learning and grading system, we focus on 3 important ideas. The first is clear learning goals. In all of our situations, if we know where we're going, we are more likely to be able to get there and to get there efficiently. And so what we highlighted earlier is that sharing those learning goals and learning targets with students is something that we've been deepening in our practice and will continue to get stronger and better as we move in deeper into a standards-based grading system. The second big idea is that assessments are clearly aligned to our standards and to that priority learning that we're committed to measuring and reporting to you and your students on. And then the third big idea is that feedback is critically important to support that ongoing student learning. So we hold clarity in where we're going, the assessments are aligned to those learning goals and outcomes, and we're working on building cycles where students are getting regular feedback. And in a standards-based system, that feedback can come from a variety of places. It could be students assessing themselves with rubrics and other tools. It could be peer feedback, or it could be educator feedback. Because in a standards-based system, we're working to build the agency and clarity for all of the folks within our learning community. Another piece I want to, and this is connected to that second big idea around standards-aligned assessments. In a standards-based grading system, we elevate that practice helps to support learning, all right? And there is a difference between our learning zone and our performance zone. Students need an opportunity to experience new learning, practice it, and get feedback before we record evidence for our academic learning measures in our grade books. We fundamentally understand this when we think about sports and music. We need to also apply these ideas to school and academic learning. Students need safe spaces to be practicing and getting feedback. There's research around grading and report cards that says that the minute that we as educators put a grade or a number on a student's work, their learning has stopped. And so in a standards-based system, we work more with feedback, whether it's from peers, self, or educator, to drive learning and less with our scores. Because that research indicates that minute that we judge that work and put a number or score on it, the student is done learning with that task. This means that educators may record student practice attempts to support learning, but the evidence or grades that are for academic measures will be after students have had the opportunities to practice and get feedback. These assessments will include end-of-unit assessments, as well as performance assessments, quizzes, shorter tasks. What they will have in common is that they're standards aligned and that they're administered after teaching, practice, and feedback. Assessments are not always big assessments or big tests. They can be broken apart, and students can have opportunities to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways. So that moves us out of our 3 shifts. And I'm going to give you about 5 more minutes on this deeper look. And then I'm going to open it up for question and answers, because I know in May, when the sun is out, it is hard to hold on this long. And some of you may very well be juggling kids and dinner and all sorts of things. So I appreciate you being here. We are in the home stretch. All right. So I've given you a quick view of certain pieces of the report card. The report card will have several fundamental changes. We will report learning at the descriptor level. All right. We will report both learning habits, our process of learning, and our academic learning, product of learning. And then the descriptors on the report card will be clear and transparent to students and families, and will be embedded in our classroom learning. A major shift here is we are not issuing a grade at the English literacy and language arts level or at the math level. Where we are issuing grades going forward will be at the descriptor levels, so students understand where they are in the specific areas of learning and which aspects of learning they need to focus on, change, and improve. All right, and this is an example from 8th grade literacy. One of our report card descriptors for next year in 8th grade literacy is right here on the screen. To determine or clarify the meaning of unknown or multiple meaning words or phrases in an 8th grade reading and based on 8th grade reading and content, choosing flexibly from a range of strategies. What you see underneath here are the learning targets that are referred to earlier. Students have access to these learning targets, and learning targets help to define what success will look like when students can do this particular skill. We also try to anchor our learning targets at the particular trimester that's for students. And so here we have the end of trimester 3 student learning targets aligned to that report card descriptor. And so what we're looking for is students to be able to demonstrate with independence their ability to do these things with a grade level text. It is important to note that when we talk about reading, the skills need to be demonstrated in a text that is at that grade level complexity. All right. An additional piece to think about in relation to this work is the descriptors are to indicate where the child is on their learning journey. A student may be beginning or progressing in trimester 1, or and essentially not yet demonstrating that grade level learning. If we see that that student is demonstrating growth and is on pace to be able to demonstrate that grade level learning before the end of the year, that may mean that that student is moving and progressing at the way that we would hope. What we are looking for is to understand where students are in their learning journey and to see growth and progress that will move us to a space of being able to ensure that they are meeting those grade level standards by the end of the year. And another second thing to note here is these descriptors will apply to the vast majority of District 65 students, including students who are English language learners and students with IEPs, and we'll address that in a slide that is coming up. Second example here is science, and this is an 8th grade reporting standard for science. In science, we're working to kind of integrate together 3 different dimensions of learning in our reporting descriptors. And so it is grounded pretty specifically in the unit of study that they're teaching. And you'll see that the learning targets are stated below to support students and, again, understanding what success looks like in that particular area of learning. Now, how does standards-based grading play out when a student has an IEP? It's important to note that a standards-based grading system applies for the vast majority of learners in District 65. And the goal of a District 65 report card is to provide transparent information for where a student is in relation to grade level expectations. All right. And with a student with an IEP, that holds true. We want to reflect where that student is in their learning journey in relation to grade level expectations, while holding that the assessment tasks that we're using to inform the grade the student should have the accommodations guaranteed them in their IEP in place to make that a valid assessment. All right. At the same time that our students will receive our standards-based report card at the end of trimester 1, 2, and 3, students will also, if they have an IEP, receive an IEP progress report. That IEP progress report serves a different function. It reports where students are in relation to their IEP goals. So a student with an IEP will both receive a report on where they are in relation to grade level standards with their accommodations in place, as well as where they are in relation to their IEP goals. And those will be two separate documents that arrive at the same time. This particular diagram helps to kind of spell out the role of accommodations, as well as, in some cases, less than 5% of our district, we do have students that require modified curriculum. And in the case that there's modified curriculum, those students would have that indicated on the report card, and we would report separately in their learning. But again, that is a very small number of students within our district. Second group of learners to be thinking about in regards to a standards-based report card are our multilingual learners. Similar to our students with IEPs, the report card is intended to be a snapshot of current learning in relation to grade level standards. And so students that have that are EL will also be receiving a report card using the same reporting standards and learning targets, and it will report on where they are in relation to grade level learning. At the same time, an EL would receive an English language proficiency progress report that would also then inform where we are in regards to our specific language growth aligned to our access scores. Now that is for ELs. We also have ELs within our two-way immersion program. For students that are in our two-way immersion program, if they have an EL designation, they will receive the language proficiency progress report, and they will also receive on the report card, they will have reporting descriptors and learning targets for Spanish literacy and language arts, because two-way immersion is a dual language program, so we report both on English and Spanish. All right, and for many of you, when we get kids to middle school, we start immediately thinking about what comes next. So a final layer of going deeper is to speak to how this supports students as they transition to ETHS and other high schools. This system is a system that an increasing number of school districts are moving to. In fact, many of our other school districts that are in the North Cook region have made this shift to standards-based grading in our kindergarten through 8th grade spaces. They do it for many of the reasons that we're doing it. It has the opportunity to increase our students' agency, to increase our clarity about learning goals. And when we look at educational research, clarity and agency are strong contributors to increasing student learning. As a result, whether your student would be going on to ETHS or would be going on to another high school, high schools have moved to a space where they can receive and understand transcripts that are aligned to standards-based grading. Anytime a transcript goes out in District 65 going forward, there will be a letter of explanation to make sense of our codes to be able to inform any future placements. Additionally, as we've discussed in this session, standards-based grading does increase those elements of student agency and metacognition, which are incredibly important as students are moving into high school. We have engaged with Evanston Township High School about this work. They are aware of it, and they are supportive of our shift and the opportunities specifically to develop student skill sets that they see as supportive for learning at ETHS. And as we are doing this work, we've been fortunate enough to have a member of the ETHS math team engaging with our math educators is in the process of our learning. And so there's a lot of strong synergy in this work and a level of support going forward. So in closing, we are making shifts in our middle school report card for the next school year. The goal ultimately is to build a learning system that culminates in grades that are increasingly meaningful, accurate, and actionable for you, our families, our students, and ultimately our educators. It's about going from general to specific, to wondering what it means, to having a clearer understanding of where my student is, what they need to do next, and where we can go. And as a quick recap, the shifts that we talked about tonight were about moving from general to specific, from combined to separate, and about elevating clarity and agency in learning. So I've been talking for a long time. I am going to take a quick break here and stop screen share. And Alyssa and I will work through questions. If there are questions coming up, I know people have been putting them in the chat as they go, but please feel free to enter them into the chat. And note that we will collect these questions, and ultimately we do have a District 65 webpage built out to standards-based grading for this year. It will be updated and we'll be creating more and more resources for families as we go forward. Dr. Berg, do you have questions you want to start us off with?
Yes. Our first question is, how will the transition from middle school to high school be affected?
I'll pick up too. Dr. Berg, you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I'm going to take the questions because she's been organizing them for me. So the first question that came into the chat was, how will the transition from middle school to high school be affected, and do grades factor into high school, such as AP classes? So thank you, because you helped me remember that I missed something on that too. If I were to go back to that slide, I actually referred to course placement as well. When students move in, and I have a link that I will go ahead and put right in the chat for all the folks that are here. The first piece, even though it's not directly in your question, is wondering for families is probably like, does this impact what course my child ends up in? And the answer is that it does not impact the course placement process. For those of you that maybe have or have not had kids go to ETHS, the link that I just put into the chat is that gives you the information that ETHS uses for course placement. They rely predominantly on math scores with some educator recommendations to place students in freshman courses for math and literacy. Beyond that, they use internal data in order to determine course placement for the rest of ETHS. So it would not impact in any way an opportunity for AP classes. All right, and then I got to flip back. Sorry, I've got a few too many tabs here. I want to be able to see the questions. All right. Second question was, how would feedback discussions with teachers work? 5 minutes is insufficient. We agree with you on that. 5 minutes is insufficient. As we move into this next year and in the following years, we do want to, educators as well, want to look at a way that we could potentially do conferences differently. We are not ready to make that change next year. That is a place where we would love some input, and we'd have to figure out some of the logistics. So we agree that the 5-minute conferences are not sufficient. We do not yet have a good answer on how to move forward in a different way. Okay. How does testing fit in here? Will parents still be able to monitor test scores in PowerSchool? So PowerSchool will still be available to families. We are currently working on the format of that. The goal is that families would still be able to access information, but it would be broken out by both how is my student going about their learning, the practice side of things, as well as kind of the game time side of things, which are the academic learning measures. And so data will still be going in. It will not necessarily, I will say some of our practices about getting grades into the gradebook are inconsistent. Standards-based grading does slow down the number of entries into that gradebook because we will show practice, but the actual assessments are after the practice, so they come in a little bit later. And we will have more information on what families can expect and what that will look like when we get around to the fall sessions. Can we obtain a printout of these slides? Yes, I will go ahead and I can actually, in a minute, I can actually, Alyssa, would you mind doing a PDF of the slides and putting it in the chat for me? I do believe she's still there, so hopefully that'll work. If not, I'll do it. Yep, will do. She's got it. All right. Why can't the standards-based rubric, or why can't the standards-based rubric be paired with a grade? What we're trying to do as we move into standards-based grading, and as one of the goals of standards-based grading, is to really be much more specific. Your question kind of reverts back to that very first kind of narration about the B. The B doesn't give us information about learning, and if we start trying to roll these things up, it is difficult to be able to say, which of these certain elements of the learning are more important than others. And so it begins to cloud some of the clarity that we ultimately are trying to get in the system. How will the grades transition for students who might move out of state for a few years? Will these new grading systems support other outer state and outer district systems who do not follow the system? Yes. And as I said, like right now, I would say, I said a large number of the districts in our North Cook area have either made this move or are making this move. And what is necessary is just quite frankly, a first page that explains our grading system. And this is something that is fairly common in other districts. And so we can attach that description and it will allow districts to be able to place kids no matter where we land, whether people are in different districts or different states. One of the individuals that we've connected with in this work has literally worked with districts across the country, as well as I think 8 of the top 10, the largest districts in the country. And so this is something that we are moving with the group, not outside on our own. I don't understand why MAP would be the only way for placement. Some kids don't test well, so MAP can be less accurate, I think. Here, please explain. So we do not determine the placement process going into ETHS. That is why I linked to the ETHS placement process. I think part of it is they do also have a process for gathering some information from educators. So I recommend that you read that website in order to fully understand. What is clear, though, is that grades do not have a determination heavily in that course placement. Okay. All right. So my 6th grade daughter has been talking about a tremendous amount of group-based work in middle school, including math. This far exceeds anything I've ever experienced as a student. They have also been huge disparities in level of motivation among students with unequal efforts in group-based work, but the same grade given to all. How will the new grading system account for these situations, and how exactly is this new standard improving college readiness when there's already been a marked shift towards grade inflation? All right, so you got a lot in that question, so I'll try to take it apart. In a standards-based grading, well, actually, I'm going to start with group work. Group work can be a great place to be able to do your practice and learning. Okay, when we talk though about standards-based assessment and a standards-based grading system, we generally talk about students being able to demonstrate that learning with independence unless the standard says otherwise. And an example might be like our drama standards. Our drama standards require students to be collaborating with each other in the process of demonstrating the skills aligned to our drama standards. In math, your example there, that is not the case. And so as we move into that standards-based system, we may be doing our group work and our practice work together because we learn well frequently in our groups, but we will be looking to find evidence when students are doing that independently to factor into the grade, because that is about clarity. So you would see less group work in that academic learning measure side that lets you know how your child is doing around the very specific learning. I hope that was clear. And then the second question here was, how exactly is the new standard improving college readiness when there's already been marked a shift towards grade inflation? We do part of our process and our learning in this work, as I've been doing this work with educators, with community members, with administrators, is that we have been looking at the grades we've been issued next to our Illinois Assessment of Readiness scores, our MAP scores, other things, because as you mentioned earlier, kids perform differently on some of those types of tests. Okay, some kids show up better on authentic student work. Some folks show up better on a standardized test. But what we do see is that the percentage of A's and B's that we're issuing in the district is pretty high and isn't always reflective of the number of kids that are at grade level. And so that is part of this work, is to get clearer with families. A's and B's sometimes can be driven more by compliance or effort. And it's to take those things apart and say, your kid is working super hard, but they're not yet at grade level, or vice versa. Your kid's got this, but their work habits need improvement. And so we do see, one of the impacts of this would be that we're looking more towards evidence and we may see less grade inflation. what has been done, and I'm going to go for about 4 more minutes on questions, and what I don't get to, we will certainly add to the FAQ. What has been done or what will be done to prepare the students about this upcoming change? So we've done a couple things. We're met with every school team, all the educators, and we are working, and I actually met with the student advisory committee that meets with Dr. Horton to talk through this change and get their input about outreach to students. We are putting together slides and presentations. We're looking to get some of that information out to students before the end of the school year. And then we are looking to very intentionally include that information early and often in our next school year. Some of that will be embedded in teacher lessons. Some of it will be slides and video so that we get consistent messages. And some of that will also be included in the communications that come home to families at the beginning of the school year in regards to their courses. So we want to try to communicate with students and families in a number of different ways. The examples shared are written in complex multi-part sentences and take some effort to parse through. Is there an effort to edit these standards and share with kids to ensure that they can comprehend and align it? Thank you. It's a good question. We are doing a kind of general read of our current draft of this report card to see if there is a way to standardize and simplify some of the language. Then underneath the learning targets, we do specifically try to write in student-friendly language. And we have kind of multiple readers take a pass at that. Where there is academic language in the learning targets, we call out that, hey, that has to be taught in some of the vocabulary with those units. And so agreed, we still have to do some work in simplifying that language, but also there will be some academic language that we have to include in our teaching. But there are actual tests and scores. Students get 8 out of 10 on a test. So what you're going to be more likely to see in the grade book is the same measures that we've talked about in a report card. Is a student beginning on that skill? Are they progressing on that skill? Are they meeting, or are they extending? And so there will still be scores coming back, but they won't necessarily be percentages. Okay. And it would be possible to add a more detailed slide on what high school looks like for placement. What I would really encourage you to do around high school placement is to go to that link and really read up. They give a lot of good detail there. And I want to make sure that we go right to the source. And ETHS has even asked me to do that in the past, is to make sure that we send people specifically to their website, because that is the most accurate place to get information on course placement.